Mother of 5, yet she keeps slim as her teenage daughter.
Look, if you remember burning your legs on a metal slide and drinking from a garden hose like it was fine dining, you didn't just grow up, you survived something kids today would call dangerous. The 1970s weren't just a decade, they were childhood on hard mode. And these 25 things? Today's kids wouldn't last a week, but we did, somehow. The scorching metal slide. That first step onto the slide ladder, you could already feel the heat radiating up through your sneakers. The metal rungs were like touching a stovetop, but you climbed anyway because that's what you did. You'd reach the top and see other kids below, some doing that awkward dance on their butts, trying to find a cool spot that didn't exist. The smart ones brought towels or waited for a cloud to pass over. But most of us, we just went for it. You'd position yourself at the top, take a deep breath, and commit. The first contact was always a shock, that split second where the metal hit your legs and you realized you'd made a terrible mistake, but it was too late. You were already sliding down, legs burning, moving faster than you wanted because the heat made everything slippery. This wasn't just about playground equipment. This was about learning that sometimes life burns a little and you push through anyway. Parents weren't hovering with sunscreen and warnings. They were sitting on benches, maybe glancing over occasionally, trusting you to figure it out. Summer meant dealing with hot metal, period. No special coating, no shade structures, no temperature warnings. And somehow, we survived those second-degree slide burns and came back the next day, maybe with pants this time. No seatbelts or car seats in the back seat. The sound of vinyl seats sticking to your legs in summer heat, that's what freedom sounded like. You'd slide across that bench seat like you were surfing every time Dad took a corner. Car rides were full-contact sports back then. No individual seats, no barriers, just you and your siblings in one big wrestling ring on wheels. When Mom hit the brakes, her right arm would shoot out like a gate, trying to catch whoever was about to become a human projectile. We called it the Mom Bar, and it was the only safety feature most of us knew. You'd pile in, sometimes 6 kids across that back seat, and just hold on. Road trips meant someone was definitely ending up on the floor. Someone else was getting carsick on the person next to them, and everybody was fighting over who got the window. This wasn't just transportation. This was learning physics the hard way. Momentum, gravity, the relationship between speed and pain. Parents weren't worried about safety ratings or crash tests. Cars were for getting from point A to point B, and kids were resilient enough to handle the journey. The idea that every child needed their own secured seat, that was future thinking. And somehow we survived thousands of miles of human pinball, and most of us learned to love road trips anyway. The dreaded wooden paddle at school. You'd hear the whistle of air right before the crack echoed through the hallway. Even if it wasn't your turn, that sound made everyone within earshot sit up straighter in their desks. The principal's office had that paddle hanging right there on the wall like some kind of medieval weapon display. It wasn't hidden or locked away. It was front and center, a constant reminder that actions had consequences. You'd sit in those hard plastic chairs outside his office, staring at that thing, wondering if today was the day you'd get acquainted with it. Some teachers had their own paddles, too, decorated with holes or painted with messages. They weren't shy about showing them off during parent-teacher conferences either. Little Johnny needs to understand that disrupting class isn't acceptable. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about a completely different approach to authority and consequences. Schools and parents were partners in the same mission, raising kids who understood boundaries. There was no calling lawyers or questioning methods. If you got paddled at school, you were probably in trouble at home, too. The idea that physical consequences were harmful rather than educational? Washing your mouth out with soap. The taste of ivory soap is something you never forget. That chalky, bitter flavor coating your tongue while your mom stood there with her arms crossed, making sure you got the full experience. You'd said something. Maybe a curse word you heard on TV or talked back with a little too much attitude. and instead of a lecture about appropriate language, you got marched straight to the bathroom sink. "Open your mouth," she'd say, and you knew there was no negotiating. The bar of soap would go in, you'd get a good scrubbing around your teeth and tongue, and then you'd stand there spitting and gagging while she explained that dirty words required dirty mouth cleaning. Some moms went with liquid soap, which was somehow worse because it foamed up and got everywhere. You'd be tasting bubbles for hours. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about learning that words have power and consequences. There was no discussion about emotional damage or alternative discipline methods. Disrespectful language got immediate, memorable correction. Parents weren't worried about traumatizing you. They were worried about raising a kid who couldn't control their mouth in polite company. The idea that soap might be harmful? It was just soap. And somehow we survived those sudsy lessons in vocabulary control, and most of us learned to watch our language around authority figures. Calling a landline, and everyone listening in, that rotary dial clicking back into place. One number at a time, while you prayed the person you were calling would actually answer, and not their scary older brother. Making phone calls was a full family event back then. One phone, usually hanging on the kitchen wall, with a cord that barely reached the table if you were lucky. You'd dial your friend's number, which you actually had memorized, and wait through the rings. But here's the thing, you never knew who was going to pick up. Could be your friend, could be their mom asking 20 questions about homework, could be their dad wanting to know why you were calling during dinner. And once someone answered, the whole house was involved. Brothers and sisters would hover around making faces, parents would pause their conversations to listen in, and everyone had opinions about your phone etiquette. This wasn't just about communication. This was about learning social skills under pressure. You had to be polite to adults, clear about your purpose, and respectful of family time. Privacy was a luxury that didn't exist. The idea that every kid needed their own private line, that was rich people stuff. You shared everything, the phone, the conversations, and the consequences if you tied up the line too long. Go play outside until the street lights came on. That moment when Mom's voice echoed through the house. Get outside and don't come back until dinner. The screen door would slam behind you, and suddenly the whole neighborhood was your world. You'd wander out with no plan, no schedule, no adult supervision beyond the occasional neighbor glancing out their window. The day stretched ahead like an adventure waiting to happen. You might start at the creek, move to someone's backyard for a pickup game, end up at the corner store with pocket change, and finish building forts in the woods behind the development. Time was measured by your stomach and the position of the sun. When the streetlights flickered on, that was your cue to head home, dirty and exhausted. Some days you'd range miles from home, following interesting paths or chasing rumors of cool stuff happening in other neighborhoods. This wasn't just about entertainment. This was about learning independence, problem-solving, and risk assessment without safety nets. Parents weren't tracking your location or scheduling your activities. They trusted you to be smart, trusted the neighborhood to be safe enough, and trusted that boredom would lead to creativity rather than trouble. The one television with 3 channels, that satisfying click of the channel knob turning, and the static-filled pause between stations while you waited to see what came into focus on the fuzzy screen. You'd stand there in front of that massive wooden console, turning the dial through the channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, and if you were lucky, maybe PBS came through clear enough to watch. But here's the thing, you watched whatever was on. No browsing through endless options, no recording shows for later, no switching between 17 different programs. If the Brady Bunch was on, you watched the Brady Bunch. If it was educational programming about farm equipment, well, you learned about farm equipment. The whole family gathered around that one screen, negotiating what to watch like we were the United Nations. Dad controlled the remote, which was you walking over to change the channel, and everyone else had to live with his decisions. This wasn't just about entertainment. This was about learning to be satisfied with what you had, sharing experiences with people who might have different preferences, and actually paying attention to what was in front of you. Families watched shows together and talked about them. The idea that every person needed their own screen and personalized content, that was science fiction. You shared everything, the programs, the schedule, and the disappointment when your favorite show got preempted by a special news report. Powdered milk in a pitcher, that yellowish-white liquid that never quite looked right, no matter how hard you stirred it. You'd watch Mom dump the powder into the water, creating clouds of dusty particles that seemed to float forever. The taste was, well, it was milk adjacent. Not quite the real thing, but close enough that you got used to it. You'd pour it over your cereal and try not to think about how different it was from the thick, creamy milk at your friend's house, whose parents could afford the good stuff. Sometimes there'd be lumps, little powder pockets that Mom missed during the mixing process. You'd hit one while drinking and have to decide whether to swallow it or spit it out while she wasn't looking. The pitcher lived in the fridge next to the real butter and whatever leftovers were worth saving. A daily reminder that families made do with what they could afford. This wasn't just about saving money. This was about learning that good enough was often good enough, and that being grateful for what you had was more important than complaining about what you didn't. Families weren't embarrassed about cost-cutting measures. They were practical. The idea that kids needed premium versions of everything? That was a luxury mindset most families couldn't afford to indulge. And somehow we survived those compromised calcium sources, and most of us learned to appreciate the difference between wants and needs. The smell of cigarette smoke everywhere.
Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette.
That blue haze hanging in the air at restaurants, the stale smell in your hair after riding in someone's car, the ashtrays overflowing on every table and desk you encountered. You'd walk into any public space and just accept that you were going to breathe other people's cigarette smoke. Grocery stores, doctors' offices, airplanes, especially airplanes. The smoking section was usually just the back half of the plane. Like smoke understood boundaries. Your friend's mom would light up while driving carpool, window cracked about an inch, asking if anyone minded while she was already halfway through her Virginia Slim. Teachers smoked in the faculty lounge, and the smell would drift into classrooms. Even hospitals had designated smoking areas right inside the building. You'd get used to the smell on your clothes, in your hair, and just accepted it as part of being around adults. This wasn't just about different health awareness. This was about a completely different relationship with personal space and public courtesy. Adults smoked because it was normal, socially acceptable, and nobody questioned their right to do it almost anywhere. The idea that secondhand smoke was harmful? That was still being debated. People weren't trying to be inconsiderate. They were just living according to the social norms of the time. Tang for breakfast, that nuclear orange powder creating swirls in your glass while you stirred. Knowing full well this was supposed to be your vitamin C for the day. You'd mix it thick or thin, depending on how much powder was left in the container, creating anything from orange water to liquid candy. The taste was, well, it was orangish. Sort of like someone had described an orange to someone who'd never seen one, and they tried to recreate it in a lab. But hey, astronauts drank it, so it had to be good for you, right? You'd down a glass with your Pop-Tarts or Lucky Charms, getting your daily dose of artificial everything before heading off to school. Some kids would eat the powder straight from the container when their parents weren't looking, which was basically like mainlining sugar and food coloring. This wasn't just about breakfast drinks. This was about a time when space age meant better and artificial meant advanced. Families weren't reading ingredient labels or worrying about natural versus processed. If it was convenient and kids would drink it, that was good enough. The idea that breakfast should be farm fresh and organic, that was granola hippie stuff. You got your vitamins from whatever said fortified on the package. Dangerous playground equipment. That moment when you'd grab the merry-go-round handles and your friends would push until you were spinning so fast, the world became a blur of colors and nausea. The playground was basically a collection of ways to hurt yourself, and that was the point. Merry-go-rounds that could launch you into orbit, seesaws that could catapult you into the stratosphere if your partner jumped off at the wrong moment, and monkey bars over concrete. Not rubber mats, not sand, just good old-fashioned concrete that would teach you about grip strength real quick. The spinning equipment was the worst and the best. You'd hang on for dear life while some kid's older brother pushed you faster than physics intended. And when you finally let go, you'd stumble around like a drunk person for 5 minutes, but you'd get back on, because that dizzy, nauseated feeling was somehow fun. This wasn't just about playground design. This was about learning risk assessment through trial and error, mostly error. Parents weren't worried about liability or safety standards. They figured kids would learn their limits by finding them. The idea that playground equipment should be safe enough that kids couldn't hurt themselves, that was taking all the learning out of learning. Pain was a teacher, and the playground was school, and somehow we survived those gravity-defying centrifugal adventures, and most of us learned to trust our grip strength and inner ear. Walking to school alone. That first day, Mom said, "You're old enough to walk by yourself now," and suddenly you were responsible for getting yourself to school in one piece. You'd grab your lunch money, your book bag, and head out the door with nothing but your wits, and maybe a friend to walk with if you were lucky. No GPS tracking, no cell phone check-ins, no adult supervision between your front door and the school steps. You learned the route, you learned the shortcuts, and you learned which houses had the mean dogs and which ones had the nice old ladies who might give you a cookie if you helped them with their groceries. Some days you'd take the long way just to see what was happening in the neighborhood. Other days you'd run because you slept through your alarm and Mom was not driving you to school. This wasn't just about transportation. This was about learning independence, time management, and street smarts. Parents trusted you to be responsible, trusted the community to look out for kids, and trusted that walking a few blocks wouldn't kill you. The idea that children needed adult supervision every step of the way, that was paranoid parenting. You learned to be self-reliant because the alternative was being late. Drinking from the garden hose, that metallic taste of water that had been sitting in a hose in the summer sun, delivered at whatever temperature the gods of hydration decided you deserved. You'd twist the nozzle and get that first blast of water that was roughly the temperature of bath water, followed by the slightly cooler water that had been in the shade part of the hose. Sometimes it tasted like rubber, sometimes like metal, sometimes like whatever chemicals were in the water treatment plant that day. But when you were thirsty from playing outside all day, it was the most refreshing thing in the world. You'd drink it straight from the hose, spray it on your face, fill up water balloons, and generally use it like your personal water fountain. The fancy kids might have had a pool, but everybody had a garden hose. This wasn't just about hydration. This was about learning that water was water, and when you were thirsty, you drank what was available. Parents weren't worried about water quality or temperature or whether the hose was food safe. They figured if it was good enough for the garden, it was good enough for kids. The idea that children needed filtered, temperature-controlled, bottled water, that was a luxury mindset most families couldn't afford to indulge. And somehow, we survived those rubber-flavored refreshment sessions, and most of us learned to be grateful for clean water in any form. Riding in the back of a pickup truck, that feeling of freedom as the wind whipped through your hair, sitting on the wheel wells or the tailgate, watching the world disappear behind you at 45 miles per hour. You'd pile into the truck bed with your siblings and maybe a neighbor kid or two, finding whatever was comfortable among the tools and lawn equipment. Dad would holler something about holding on, and then you'd be off. experiencing the world from a completely different perspective. The air was fresher, the view was better, and every bump in the road was an adventure. You'd wave at people in other cars, feel like you were flying when you went over hills, and try not to think about what would happen if Dad had to stop suddenly. Sometimes you'd take the long way home just to enjoy the ride. Other times you'd help Dad with errands, hopping out to help load lumber or feed at the co-op. This wasn't just about transportation. This was about learning to trust your balance, your grip strength, and your father's driving. Families weren't worried about safety regulations or child endangerment. They figured kids were smart enough to hold on and tough enough to handle a little wind. Mercury thermometers. That moment when you'd accidentally drop the thermometer and watch those little silver balls scatter across the bathroom floor like they were alive. You'd chase them around with a piece of paper, trying to gather them back together, fascinated by how they'd merge into bigger balls when they touched each other. Sometimes you'd play with the mercury before Mom noticed, rolling it around in your palm, amazed by how it moved like liquid metal. When a thermometer broke, it was more of an inconvenience than a crisis. You'd clean it up as best you could and throw the glass away, maybe missing a few tiny silver dots that would turn up months later. Some kids would save mercury in small containers, playing with it like it was a cool science experiment. This wasn't just about taking temperatures. This was about growing up in a time when we didn't know everything was dangerous, and sometimes ignorance was bliss. Families weren't worried about toxic exposure or proper hazmat cleanup. They figured a little mercury wasn't going to hurt anyone, and they were probably right, most of the time. The idea that household items could be poisonous? That was future thinking, staying out until dark, that magical time when the sky turned purple and the streetlights started flickering on, and you knew you had maybe 15 more minutes before Mom started calling your name. You'd squeeze every last minute out of daylight, playing whatever game you could manage in the growing darkness. Tag became more dangerous and more fun when you couldn't see clearly. Hide and seek became epic when the shadows were deep enough to really disappear. You'd negotiate with darkness like it was a friend, pushing the boundaries of what you could do with less and less light. Sometimes you'd get so caught up in play that you'd forget to watch the sky, and suddenly you'd realize it was full dark and you were in trouble. The mad dash home, hoping Mom hadn't noticed how late it was, became its own kind of adventure. This wasn't just about playtime. This was about learning to gauge time by natural light, to push boundaries responsibly, and to manage your own schedule without constant reminders. Parents trusted you to come home when you were supposed to, trusted the neighborhood to be safe after dark, and trusted that you'd learn time management through natural consequences. No helmets for anything. That feeling of complete freedom as you pedaled your bike down the biggest hill in the neighborhood, wind in your hair, bugs in your teeth, and absolutely nothing protecting your head from the concrete below. You'd ride bikes, skateboards, roller skates, and anything else with wheels, and the only protection you had was your own sense of balance and maybe a guardian angel working overtime. Skateboarding downstairs, jumping bikes over homemade ramps, racing down hills on whatever rolling contraption you could find, all without any thought of head protection. The idea was simple: don't fall. And if you did fall, well, you'd learn to fall better next time. Scrapes and bruises were badges of honor, proof that you were pushing limits and learning skills. A bloody knee was a story to tell, not a reason to quit. This wasn't just about safety equipment. This was about learning risk assessment through experience, developing natural protective instincts, and understanding that some activities came with consequences. Parents weren't worried about head injuries because head injuries were rare, and they figured kids would learn to be careful through trial and error. The idea that every activity needed protective gear? That was taking the learning out of learning. Eating cookie dough and cake batter, That moment when Mom would hand you the mixing bowl and the wooden spoon, and you'd scrape out every last bit of chocolatey, sugary goodness, raw eggs and all. You'd fight your siblings for the privilege of licking the bowl, and whoever got the beaters was basically the winner of the lottery. Raw cookie dough was a delicacy, cake batter was a treat, and nobody worried about salmonella or E. coli or any of the other scary bacteria that apparently lived in raw eggs. Sometimes you'd sneak tastes while Mom was cooking, hoping she wouldn't notice that the dough level had dropped significantly between mixing and baking. The bowl licking was a family tradition, passed down through generations of kids who survived raw egg consumption and lived to tell about it. This wasn't just about cooking. This was about learning that some risks were worth taking, that food was meant to be enjoyed, and that the best parts of cooking were often the parts that didn't make it to the final dish. Families weren't worried about food safety because food poisoning was rare, and they figured kids had strong enough stomachs to handle a little raw egg. The idea that cookie dough was dangerous, that was taking the fun out of baking. You learned to trust your immune system and enjoy life's simple pleasures. And somehow, we survived those salmonella-laden treats, and most of us learned to appreciate the process of cooking as much as the final product. Public pool hygiene. That moment when you'd jump into the community pool and realize the water was roughly the same temperature as a warm bath, with roughly the same level of cleanliness as a mud puddle. You'd swim in water that was so cloudy you couldn't see your feet, so warm it felt like soup, and so chemically treated it would bleach your hair and burn your eyes. But it was water, and it was summer. And swimming was swimming. You'd spend hours in that pool, getting out only when your lips turned blue, or your fingers got so wrinkled they looked like raisins. The baby pool was basically a petri dish of every childhood disease known to man, but little kids would splash around in it like it was their personal paradise. The pool deck was hot enough to fry eggs, but you'd run across it barefoot because that's what you did. This wasn't just about swimming. This was about learning that perfect conditions weren't necessary for fun, that your body could handle a lot more than you thought, and that community spaces were meant to be shared even if they weren't pristine. Parents weren't worried about water quality because pools were treated with chemicals, and they figured kids would build immunity through exposure. Lawn darts, that satisfying thunk as the weighted metal dart buried itself in the grass, hopefully nowhere near your little brother who was standing way too close to the target. You'd set up the rings in the backyard and take turns throwing those heavy, pointed projectiles through the air, trying to land them inside the circle while everyone else stood at what you hoped was a safe distance. The darts were basically spears with fins designed to fly through the air and stick into whatever they hit, hopefully the ground, but sometimes trees, fences, or the neighbor's doghouse. You'd argue about scoring, negotiate throwing distances, and generally have a great time hurling dangerous objects around the yard. The whole family would play, from grandparents to little kids, all sharing the same potentially deadly lawn game. This wasn't just about backyard games. This was about learning hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, and the importance of paying attention to where everyone was standing. Families weren't worried about safety because the darts were toys, and they figured kids would learn to be careful through experience. Walking to the corner store with $1, that feeling of independence as you walked to the local convenience store with your allowance money, knowing you could buy anything you wanted as long as it cost less than $1. You'd study the candy aisle like you were choosing investments, calculating how many pieces of bubble gum you could get versus one candy bar, weighing the pros and cons of chocolate versus sour versus sweet. $1 could buy you a Coke, a bag of chips, and still have change left over. Sometimes you'd pool your money with friends and buy something bigger, like a whole pack of baseball cards or a magazine. The store owner knew all the neighborhood kids by name, would let you look at everything twice before deciding, and trusted you to count out your own change. You were a customer, not a potential shoplifter. This wasn't just about shopping. This was about learning money management, decision-making, and how to interact with adults in business situations. Parents trusted you to walk to the store alone, trusted you to make good choices with your money, and trusted the community to look out for neighborhood kids. Saturday morning cartoons, that magical 3-hour window when television belonged to kids, and you'd wake up early just to claim your spot on the living room floor. You'd get up at dawn, pour yourself a bowl of sugary cereal, and plant yourself in front of the TV for the greatest programming lineup ever created. Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner, Scooby-Doo, Super Friends, all back to back to back until your eyes were square and your brain was mush. This was appointment television before anyone knew what that meant. You planned your entire weekend around those few hours, and if you missed your favorite show, you missed it. Period. No recording, no streaming, no second chances. The whole family would wake up to the sound of cartoon explosions and high-pitched character voices, and nobody complained because Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred tradition. This wasn't just about entertainment. This was about learning to prioritize, to wake up early for things that mattered to you, and to appreciate limited opportunities. Families weren't worried about too much screen time because screen time was naturally limited by programming schedules. The idea that kids needed endless entertainment options? That was missing the point of anticipation and delayed gratification. No air conditioning. That feeling of sleeping on top of the covers with a fan blowing directly on you, windows open, hoping for any breath of cool air to make it through the night. You'd spend summer days moving from the coolest spot in the house to the slightly less hot spot, looking for relief from the heat that never seemed to end. The whole family would migrate to the basement during the hottest parts of the day, or pile into the one room that had a window unit, sharing space and fighting over who got to stand directly in front of the cold air. You'd take multiple showers a day, drink ice water by the gallon, and learn to move slowly during the heat of the afternoon. Swimming pools, lakes, and garden sprinklers weren't just fun. They were survival strategies. You'd sleep with wet towels, freeze washcloths to put on your neck, and generally learn to cope with heat that would send modern kids running for climate control. This wasn't just about temperature control. This was about learning to adapt to discomfort, to find creative solutions to problems, and to appreciate comfort when you had it. Families weren't worried about heat exhaustion because they figured kids would learn to pace themselves and stay cool. The idea that every space needed to be climate-controlled, that was a luxury most families couldn't afford. Hitchhiking, that moment when you'd stick your thumb out and hope that the person who stopped wasn't a serial killer, just someone nice enough to give you a ride to wherever you were going. You'd walk along the highway or country road, thumb extended, trusting that someone would stop and give you a lift. Sometimes it was a neighbor who recognized you. Sometimes it was a stranger who just felt like helping a kid out. You'd hop in the car, truck, or van, make small talk about where you were going, and hope they were headed in the same direction. Parents would hitchhike, kids would hitchhike, and whole families would catch rides when their car broke down. It was community cooperation at its finest. People helping people get where they needed to go. You learned to read people quickly, to be polite and grateful, and to trust your instincts about who felt safe and who didn't. This wasn't just about transportation. This was about learning to trust strangers, to be resourceful when you needed help, and to understand that most people were basically good and willing to help. Families weren't worried about stranger danger because stranger danger was rare, and they figured kids would learn to be street smart through experience. The idea that hitchhiking was dangerous? That was paranoid thinking. You learned to be independent, social, and grateful for kindness, and somehow we survived those roadside adventures with strangers, and most of us learned to be both trusting and cautious. Being bored, that empty feeling when you'd exhausted all your usual activities and Mom would say, "Well, find something to do," and you actually had to use your imagination to create entertainment. You'd wander around the house, the yard, the neighborhood, looking for something, anything, to capture your interest. No screens to flip through, no endless options to scroll past. Just you and your own creativity. Sometimes you'd build forts out of couch cushions. Sometimes you'd dig holes in the backyard for no reason. Sometimes you'd just lie on the grass and watch clouds. Boredom was a catalyst for creativity, a prompt for exploration, and a teacher of patience. You'd learn to entertain yourself with whatever was available: cardboard boxes, sticks, rocks, and your own imagination. This wasn't just about having nothing to do. This was about learning to be comfortable with yourself, to find interest in simple things, and to understand that entertainment was something you created, not something you consumed. The idea that children needed constant entertainment? That was missing the point of childhood development. You learned to be resourceful, imaginative, and content with simple pleasures, and somehow we survived those endless summer afternoons with nothing to do, and most of us learned to be creative, self-reliant, and comfortable with solitude. If even one of these brought back the taste of Tang on your tongue or the feeling of hot metal playground equipment burning your legs, then you're part of a generation that didn't just survive childhood. You